Hey, folks, it is that time of year again. Alan Saunders, Nick Farabaugh, Pittsburgh Sports Live. We're talking the NFL draft. It's draft talk. We did this all last year. It was great. We had a lot of fun, so we're excited to do it again. Leading up to the 2023 NFL draft, Nick and I just spent the last week at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, and we're going to give some big picture takeaways from what we saw last week and how it applies to the Steelers going forward today. And then we're going to do this on a pretty regular basis until about April when we'll really get into it and start to go every day. But Nick and I will be at the Combine. We'll be at Pro Bowls. We'll be following this process every step of the way. And so thanks for joining us and following along. Nick, in Mobile, the thing I want to talk about the most here is just how the group of players there line up with the Steelers' needs, what you feel like you learned about the group in general, and maybe a little bit specifically, but mostly just in general about how this draft class you think is going to play out.
Yeah, well, I think the offensive line class is a pretty good one. I like the tackles. The senior group specifically, I think, was deep. There was none of the like tier ones like Skoronsky, Jones, Johnson, but you had Bergeron, Torrance, Schmitz, Wright, Jones. Like all these guys are here. The whole second tier was here at the Senior Bowl. And I thought many of them were very good. And I came out higher on some of them. I wasn't a huge Darnell Wright guy before. I like him a lot better now coming out of the Senior Bowl. So I think that's the first takeaway. The second takeaway, this corner class is legit, man. Like the top corners weren't even here. Like Devin Witherspoon wasn't here, and I still came away impressed by a lot of these guys. Kaibu Kelly, Julius Brents, Tyreek Stevenson. These are all I like Darius Rush out of South Carolina. Like that's a guy I didn't even have on my radar. It's a really deep corner class. It's probably the best one since 2018. It's a really good corner class. And I think the other one is, I think it's a pretty bad linebacker group. No high end linebacker here this year. There's a few good mid round ones, but none you're going to ask to start day one. I think the D line group is also pretty solid. Some of them at least the senior level, but you can get decent depth guys. I don't think you're going to get an elite guy, but like there's enough here to where if you need depth on the D line, I think you can get it.
Yeah, I think the two positions that I would say that qualifies for to me are linebacker and defensive tackle. Like I really thought that this class is not good at the top at either of those positions. Like if you're looking at the Steelers taking one of those at 17, I'm like, there's like one guy at each spot that like might be a fit. And then if you go to 32, you can add like one more guy. And so I just they're not high end classes, but it does seem like there's some depth, right? Like there was some like Keanu Benton from Wisconsin and Brooks from Bowling Green both looked really good at the Senior Bowl. Linebacker, I thought Ivan Pace from Cincinnati had a really good day, especially in the game. Um, you know, there are options there in the later rounds, but it really felt to me like coming out of this week that the biggest winners were those offensive linemen and those cornerbacks. And to me, like I said all along, I did not think the player that the Steelers are going to take at 17 was there if they stay at 17. But I think a lot of really good and intriguing options for 32 emerged, especially along the offensive line. Like I think there's a lot of different directions they could go with that. There was a mock draft this week that had them taking John Michael Schmitz from the Minnesota center. I think that's become possible. Osiris Torrance is a guard I really like. And there are tackles. You named a bunch of them that are kind of there as well. I think the Steelers should feel pretty confident after that Senior Bowl of their ability to get an offensive lineman in that top group, whether they take one at 17 or 32, they can make an impact on this team right away. And I think that's probably the biggest impact for me on the offensive side of the ball. But the Steelers were mostly looking at defense outside of that offensive line group.
Yeah, and I think that's the right thing to do. The defense has been, I don't want to say kind of just cast aside. Well, it has been because they needed to rebuild the offense with Ben Roethlisberger and everyone aging there. So they've needed to look to the offense. Well, it's time that defense, man, gets rebuilt a little bit. They either have guys that are inadequate options or are getting old. Cam Hayward's not getting any younger. Tyson Alulu is out the door finally. So you got to replace these guys. D line, it has to get a youth injection. They started that with the Marvin Leal last year, but they need it again. The secondary, yeah, they needed a top dog since Joe Hayden kind of fell off, right? They kind of have a nice stable kind of group there, but they need someone. And the linebackers just been a problem for eight, so ever since Shazier went down, really, it's been an issue. So it's time for the defense to get its worth. They need to maintain a top defense, especially with a young quarterback that is built on. This team is built on running the football and good defense. You got to make sure that defense is good, and so I feel like that they're focusing on that because you looked at the coaches they sent. Right, Grady Brown is defensive coordinator for the national team. Brian Flores, who's no longer here, but he was down there, and they sent Mike Tomlin, obviously, and then Denzel Martin was coaching the D line. So they really focused on all levels of the defense. And I expect these top, they have 4 top 100 picks. I expect 3 of those likely to be on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the most likely one, if they're going to go offensive line, I think it'll be early. I think it'll be 17 or 32 because they bring back, all 5 of the offensive linemen are under contract. So if you're talking about making an upgrade, it's going to take a high pick to get a guy that you're pretty sure is an upgrade over the players that you have. You're talking about taking an offensive lineman at 80, like, that's where you got a Dan Moore. That's where it doesn't, that there's no guarantee of that pick being any better. So, I mean, my takeaway from this is if you're looking at those sort of 3 or 4, however you want to parse them, or day 1 and day 2 picks, like an offensive lineman and all defense is kind of what I'm feeling right now. And obviously we didn't see, the high end offensive players that could be there at 17, the wide receivers not there. But man, I just it does not feel to me like, and don't get me wrong, I think the wide receivers in Mobile were actually pretty good. And I really came away with a lot of guys that I like in that mid-round range. But it feels to me like that's a position the Steelers are going to address later. And and this draft to me feels like an offensive lineman and 2 or 3 defensive players at the top right now.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable expectation. I do think that, depending on how free agency kind of cuts in, wide receiver is the interesting position because they do have a need there, but it's not like a bigger need than any of the 4 positions. But I feel like that is a position where maybe they get the right value. The right guy falls to 49, they might take him. Right guys even at 32. If a Jackson Smith and Jigba is there, I think they think about it. I think that's kind of the wild card position. But outside of that, I think these are the 4 positions they're going with.
My expectation, and this is a wide receiver class that I think showed some depth at the Senior Bowl, but I do not think is as good as the last couple have been. We saw the wide receiver market be absolutely bonkers last year. It is a really, really almost historically bad free agent wide receiver class. If you're a team that's looking to spend money in free agency, like maybe say you're the New York Giants, I don't know how you do it. Like there's just nobody out there that is gonna, it's like Juju and I don't know, go throw some money at Alan Lazard. Like, I don't know, like that. It's a really, really poor free agent class. A guy like DeAndre Hopkins, I guess, is going to be available. But, I think those receivers are going to go higher than people think because of the market for the position. Like, I can't imagine Jackson Smith and Jigba being there at 32. I have a hard time imagining. A lot of people talked about Jordan Addison being there at 17. I don't see it. Like, he's probably the best receiver in the class. There's no way receiver 1 falls to 17 if we're looking at the global wide receiver market and applying it to how teams are going to approach this draft. I just don't see it. So, like, if you're talking about a player falling to the Steelers, I think wide receiver is one of the least likely positions for that to happen.
Yeah, I do. And we have heard some reports recently that maybe Michael Thomas and Keenan Allen get cut. That'll make obviously the wide receiver class and free agency better, but then the Saints and the Chargers get thrown into the draft market. So really, if you're strengthening it by cuts elsewhere, cap casualties, you're just kind of adding to the draft pool. And you are right; it's not a great class. So if that does happen, I think it's possible. But wide receiver to me feels like a type of position right now where maybe they sign a cheaper vet and kind of just rock with that. I think that the draft class is not as top heavy and it's not very deep. I think a lot of these guys are just wide receiver 4s, wide receiver 5s. They're not going to be significant contributors. And so I think the Steelers are going to get really good value at like O-line, corner, especially corner, they're going to have great value. This edge class too,
maybe ever.
Yeah, and I'll say this: I think another takeaway I came away. I think the edge class is pretty solid. There were a few guys down in Mobile like Will McDonald, I thought was really good. I like Derek Hall. I like some of these guys we saw down there, KJ Henry, that were pretty good in the edge class, and that's a position Steelers need. I think they can get value in the edge group too. I think that could be a top four pick for them this year. So I think they're just going to get better value elsewhere other than wide receiver. But if it does happen, if there is a guy that falls onto one of those spots, I think they will think about it.
I think the other position where you could see some guys falling is maybe defensive tackle. It's again not that deep of a group, but I don't see the sort of feeding frenzy around the defensive tackles around the league like I do wide receiver. I've seen like a guy like Brian Bresee from Clemson available when the Steelers drafted 17. Ika from Baylor is a guy that is probably there when the Steelers drafted 32. I think that's a more realistic. If you're talking about guys falling down to the Steelers, I think that's a more realistic position for it to happen to. Um, but it is also again not a position where, and it never is a position where there's just a ton of really good players. There's a handful that are realistic options at each round basically. But I think the depth at that position showed up this week. And the Steel I don't know. I think the Steelers almost need to address that position before they get to the draft, just with the quantity of bodies that they're losing, right? I mean, Larry Ogunjobi is a free agent. Tyson Alulu, I assume, is going to retire. If not, I have a hard time seeing the Steelers bringing him back. And Chris Wormley is a free agent and probably won't be ready to play at the beginning of the year. So the Steelers need like 3 guys on the defensive line. They're going to have to sign at least one before we get to the draft. We'll see. Maybe they even sign a couple. But that's a position where they have a big need that I think could be met later if they're not going to reach there. I'll say that. I think they've learned enough about those later round guys, especially with Denzel Martin being the position coach, that there is enough depth there that they don't need to reach for a defensive lineman. But I think there are some guys that could fall to them that could be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, the cluster of the D tackles is at 80. I mean, you look
Right,
at
yeah, I agree with that.
like you look at like Kalijah Cansey, Maisie Smith out of Michigan, Byron Young out of Alabama, Keanu Benton, Zach Pickens out of South Carolina. I thought he was pretty good this week. He's a guy that you can look at 80 to me. You kind of have these guys that just all come together at 80 for that. I think though you look at linebacker in a different light. If you don't get one of those top linebackers, when do you actually address it? It's a deep class, but can you get a decent player in the 4th round? Can you get a Dorian Williams in the 4th round? Probably. Can you wait? I think you can, and unless you have a Drew Sanders there at 32 or Noah Sewell at 49, someone like that, where you get like Henry Toto, right? Kind of these guys. So linebacker to me is going to be one of the most interesting positions to see how they attack it in the offseason because they have 2 free agents there. You feel like they have to bring probably Spillane back. You have a cap decision to make with Miles Jack. You can make an argument that what they will do here is bet on Mark Robinson and kind of bring back Spillane, let Spillane and Jack be the starters, draft a mid-round linebacker, and kind of just push that down the road. Because to be quite honest with you, I think the secondary and the D line are more important.
Yeah, guys like Jack Campbell, Dan Henley, Ivan Pace. Like I also think that like 80 and even into the 4th round, they can get a linebacker that is going to be a useful player for them. Maybe not necessarily, like a plug and play Pro Bowler, but I think they can find the guys they need. And one that we didn't mention earlier that I think we should have, DeMarvion Overshown, who I thought really showed a very interesting skill set and his ability to be a long player that's fast, can rush the passer, and can cover.
He is built, man. Like it's
Uh,
crazy. But I do want to say this too, just as a final note. We're talking about all these needs that they have to fill in, and they have that extra pick. And we kind of talked about this scenario down in Mobile, and it came up in a recent mock draft on Pro Football Network, a trade back. I think that could easily be an option here, where they maybe trade back a little bit from 17, like the corner class, like the tackle class, like the interior line class. They feel like they can get a guy there, in the back half of round 1. They could trade back, collect another top 100 pick, and have 5 top 100 picks, and get real young there on defense, and get that O lineman in that trade back scenario. I think that's actually not a bad idea when you kind of look at it from a big point of view. They could really kind of they could double dip at a position like D line or corner or something like that and really kind of fill that position out if they do that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are looking at the addition of Andy Weidel to this front office staff and saying, "Oh, they're going to build out like the Philly team did, and build from the lines out." Well, the other thing Philly does is trade all their picks all the time. So, like in the 2022, they had 20 different draft picks in their hands at one point before settling on their final five. So don't get too attached to the spots that the Steelers are picking right now, because I think that very easily could change. I think trading down in the first round is very attractive to them. I also think trading up from 32 is very attractive for them to get into the back of that first round. You get a fifth year out of the guy you draft, which is really important. And, it probably shouldn't cost all that much. I like their chances, especially if those, to me, I think, if you're talking about guys falling, right? Like if one of the top D tackles or one of those top offensive tackles just is not there at 17, the corner class is so deep, like they'll get one even if they move down 5 or 6 picks. And I think the place where all those other offensive linemen fit after those top 3 tackles that you talked about, Skoronski, Johnson, and Jones, all the rest of those offensive linemen fit more in the 20s, in the late 20s. A guy like Anton Harrison, who wasn't at the Senior Bowl, but Osiris Torrance, John Michael Schmitz, DeJuan Jones, like they're all, to me, late first round into early second round guys. And so they can make a move and still get the guy they would have taken at 17 anyway.
Yeah, and like tackle for me is not a desperate need. Like if Dan Moore has to start another year, okay. I mean, he's not the best, but if Jones, Skoronski, and Johnson are all gone by 17, I mean, I don't think the Steelers are going to cry about throwing Dan Moore out there for another year. I think they'd ideally like another guy, but like if we look at the cap situation, Steelers are going to have some tough decisions to make because I do feel like they are going to add a splashy name from the outside, whether that be like a Tremaine Edmonds or Javon Hargrave or whoever it may be. I do feel like they will make a splash somewhere. Is that at the expense of Cam Sutton though? And that if it is, well, then your obvious pick round one is corner, and I think that's kind of where we kind of don't know yet how it's going to play out. But I think when everyone's mocking tackle, the one thing they're overlooking is unlike linebacker, unlike corner potentially, and unlike D line, they actually have a guy at offensive tackle that they can feel comfortable with running out there another year if they need to.
Yeah, I think corner they can probably get by even if they don't. It's not like they just have bodies. They don't have but like you could start Levi Wallace and Akella Witherspoon and Art Millette, and it's not like it would be like a catastrophe, right? But linebacker and D tackle are just vacant right now. They need 6 bodies between those 2 positions. And so I absolutely like if the Steelers are going to reach for a position, those are probably the ones to reach for, not tackle, where they have a guy and it's a deeper class, right? Corner, where they have some guys and it's a deeper class. Those are the positions where if they're really making a panic pick, that's probably where it needs to be.
Hey, you talk about a trade up scenario from 32. Trading up back into the first for Siaki Ika is a very realistic possibility. He's just what they need. I mean, he's a big lineman that can play nose tackle, that can play 3 rounds. He's got enough first prowess to do it, in my opinion. They could play from 0 to 3. Like that's what they need. So they could easily draft a corner at 17 or a tackle at 17, and then come back right up into the back half of round 1 and get their D tackle. I think it's a very realistic possibility that they do that. I don't. As we stand here today, in fact, I'll go out on the limb. I don't see them standing at all 4 picks. I think they're going to move her down the board in some manner.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think 49 and 80 or 50 in it, however you want to. The NFL is going to make those Dolphins picks count in the order because it screws up the draft slot system if they don't. But so whatever. Like technically, that will be pick 33 for the Steelers to start the second round. But those 2, I feel like, have good bunches of talent that we've talked about that fit those positions and the Steelers' needs. Outside of O-line and corner, which I think kind of fit everywhere in this class, the first 2 might not. And so I think we could see either or both of those first 2 picks moving for the Steelers. In fact, trading down and trading up, I think at the same time is very, very desirable for them and makes a lot of sense. You basically keep the same amount of draft capital you have in this class, and you get a second first round pick out of the deal, and you kind of hone in on those players at the right value.
Yeah, I think the Pro Football Network mock had the Steelers trading back with the Chargers to 21, getting an additional third. If that happens, well, they have 2 second rounds, 2 thirds. What's the point of not moving up at that
Right,
point, right?
trade up and get that. In fact, it may not even take a third to move up if you only have to move up 1 or 2 picks to get into
Might
the
take a
first round.
yeah, just give them the fourth round pick.
Yeah.
I mean,
Or maybe there's somebody in there that like really likes Mitch Trubisky, like so kill two birds with one stone and find some
or
days.
I know it's been something people have talked about. I don't think it's going to happen, but that is a scenario where they could move Deontay Johnson if they
Right.
really want to
Well, I
get
mean,
off that
that's
book.
sort of the end result of the whole conversation I had earlier about there are no good wide receivers around, is that people are going to ask about Deontay Johnson and they're going to offer a lot. Now we'll see how committed the Steelers are to keeping him. It's the same thing though. I mean, it then becomes their number one need basically if they do trade him.
Exactly. If they do trade him, it does become a need. But if the talk of a Keenan Allen being available is true, do they just call the Chargers up and be like, "You want to do something here?" I mean, like that. Like there's a realistic thing here for me where if you are looking to move Deontay Johnson, you have to have some answer on the roster already, or you have to be picking someone that you know you are going to get. So you have to pick at 17. You have to get Jordan Addison or Quentin Johnson. Like that's what you have to do at that point to me to move Deontay. But it is a discussion to have. But I don't think it's going to end up happening. And for the exact reason you said, like it creates a hole. It's not a position of strength, and it's a position of need, not great need. But once you get Deontay out of there, it's great need. So I don't know. It's a thing. It depends on what they do prior to the draft and at 17.
I agree. Let's continue this discussion when we get back together. We'll talk more about some of the specific guys we like for the Steelers at the Senior Bowl, and we'll do that later this week. We'll probably do this once or twice a week in this early part of the draft process, and then as things really start to pick up steam, we'll go a little bit more in depth on a daily basis. Thanks for joining us. Catch all the work at SteelersNow.com, and we'll be back with more draft talk next time.